Two women in the same town lost their husbands the same winter. Both men were veterans. Both had been sick for years. When the funerals were over and the quiet set in, one of those women started receiving a tax-free check from the VA every single month for the rest of her life. The other woman got a letter saying she did not qualify for anything at all. They had almost the same life. The difference came down to one thing their husbands did, or didn't do, years before either of them got sick. And that one thing is something your family can still fix while there is time.
Let me tell you about the second woman first, because her story is the one almost nobody sees coming. Her name was Marion. Her husband, Glenn, had served, come home, worked 30 years, and somewhere along the way, his health started to go. By his 70s, he had a stack of conditions, some of them tied to his service, and he lived on his VA disability check every month. It was a good check. It paid the difference between getting by and going under. Glenn used to tell Marion, only half joking, that the VA check was the one thing she would never have to worry about because it came like clockwork, and it always would. So when Glenn passed, Marion did the thing almost every widow does. She waited for the next check to come the way it always had, and it did not come. Not that month, not the next. She called the VA, and a kind voice on the phone explained the thing that Glenn and Marion, and most people watching right now, never understood. A veteran's disability compensation is paid to the veteran. When the veteran dies, that payment stops. It does not roll over to the spouse. It does not shrink and continue. It simply ends. The check Glenn had promised her would always be there ended the same month he did. Now here is where it turns, because there is a second benefit, a completely separate one, that exists for exactly this moment. It is called Dependency and Indemnity Compensation. Most people never learn its name. Veterans groups just call it DIC. It is a monthly tax-free payment made directly to the surviving spouse of a veteran. And in 2026, it starts at about $1,700 a month for life. That is not a small thing. Over a widow's remaining years, it can add up to a few $100,000, and it does not stop being paid the way the veteran's own check does. It is built to keep going. So the real question in Marion's story is not why Glenn's check stopped. It is why she was told she did not qualify for the check that was supposed to replace it, and that is where the lesson lives. To get DIC, in most cases, one of two things has to be true. Either the veteran died from a service-connected condition, meaning something the VA had officially tied to his service is what took him, or, and this is the part that changes everything, the veteran was rated totally disabled by the VA for a long enough stretch of time before he died, even if what finally took him had nothing to do with his service at all. That second path has a name people rarely hear. It is often called the 10-year rule. In plain terms, if a veteran was rated 100% disabled by the VA or was paid at the 100% level for being unable to work, which the VA calls unemployability, and he held that rating for at least the 10 years right before he died, then his surviving spouse can receive DIC. And here is the striking part. It does not matter what he actually died of. He could pass from something entirely unrelated to his service, and because that total rating had been in place for those 10 years, the law treats his death as service-connected for his widow's sake. The spouse does have to have been married to him across that whole 10-year stretch, but if she was, that check is hers. Now hold Glenn up against that rule, and you can see exactly what went wrong. Glenn was sick for years. By the end, he almost certainly could have been rated at the 100% level, or found unable to work and paid at that level. But he never pushed for it. He had a partial rating, enough to send that comfortable monthly check, and he never went back to claim the full rating his condition had grown into. Why chase more paperwork, he figured, when the check already came? What he did not know is that the size of his rating while he was alive quietly decided whether his wife would be protected after he was gone. Because he stayed at a partial rating, the 10-year rule never applied to him. He didn't die of something the VA had connected to his service, and he had never held that total rating. So both doors to DIC were shut, and Marion, who had done nothing wrong at all, was left with the letter. Now let me tell you about the first woman, the one who got the check, because her husband did the ordinary thing that made all the difference. Her name was Ruth. Her husband, Earl, was sick too, in a lot of the same ways Glenn was. But years before the worst of it, Earl sat down with a Veterans Service officer, and that officer looked at everything Earl was dealing with and said, "You are being underpaid. You should be rated far higher than you are." So Earl filed, and his rating was raised to the total level, and it stayed there for the rest of his life, which turned out to be more than 10 years. When Earl passed from a heart problem that no one ever formally tied to his service, Ruth still qualified for DIC under that 10-year rule because the rating had been in place the whole time. Same town, same kind of illness, same loss. One widow protected, one widow not. And the fork in the road was a decision the husbands made about a rating long before either wife knew the word DIC existed. So let me pull the real usable lessons out of these two lives, because this is where you get to change your own family's ending. The first thing worth understanding is that the veteran's disability check does not pass to a spouse. If you take nothing else from this, take that. A husband cannot simply assume his wife will keep drawing his compensation. She will not. She has to qualify for a separate benefit, DIC, and apply for it herself on her own claim. Believing the check just continues is the single most common and most expensive misunderstanding in this whole subject. The second thing is that so much of whether a spouse qualifies is decided while the veteran is still alive and still healthy enough to act. Pursuing the full rating you have actually earned is not about squeezing out a little more money each month, though it does that too. It is about switching on the 10-year clock that can protect your spouse for the rest of her life. A veteran who is genuinely at the 100% level or genuinely unable to work because of service-connected conditions and who never files for it may be leaving his spouse with nothing later without ever realizing that is the choice he is making. The third thing is a piece of good news that keeps this from being all worry, because the law also builds in real protection. If a veteran carried that total rating for at least 8 years before passing, and the spouse was married to him through those years, the VA adds an extra amount to her monthly DIC, a little over $360 more a month in 2026 on top of the base. There are added amounts for young children in the home as well. The point is that this benefit was designed to be substantial, not symbolic, for the families it is meant to catch. Now let me name the mistakes to steer around, because they trap good families. The first mistake is the one Glenn made. Sitting on a partial rating when your health has clearly grown worse, and never going back to claim what your condition has become. If you are a veteran and you are sicker than your rating says you are, that gap is not just leaving money on the table today. It may be quietly disqualifying your spouse tomorrow. The second mistake is a surviving spouse assuming she does not qualify and never applying. Marion nearly did that. But even in a case like hers, it is worth having someone knowledgeable look before she gives up, because there are more paths to DIC than most people know, and the letter that says no is not always the final word. A surviving spouse applies for DIC on a specific survivor claim form, and a Veterans Service officer will do it with her at no cost. And there is one more piece that belongs here because it lives right next to DIC and gets confused with it. If your husband served long enough to earn a military retirement, there is a separate program run by the military rather than the VA called the Survivor Benefit Plan. It lets a retiree set aside a portion of his retired pay to keep flowing to his spouse after he dies, up to 55% of that pay. But it has to be elected around the time of retirement, and once that window and its rules pass, it generally cannot be changed. It is a different benefit from DIC, from a different part of the government, and a family can be entitled to both. If retirement is in your history, that is one more thing worth checking before it is too late to choose. So here is what actually puts you back in control, laid out plainly. If you are a veteran, find out what you should truly be rated today, not what you settled for years ago. Sit down with an accredited veteran service officer, the kind who does this for free, and ask the direct question: am I rated as high as my conditions warrant, and if I am not, what would it take to fix that? That single conversation can raise your own check now and start the clock that protects your spouse later. If you are married, make sure your spouse actually knows what to do the moment you are gone, because grief is not the time to learn it cold. She should know the word DIC, know that your disability check will stop, and know to file her own claim rather than wait for a payment that is not coming. And if you are already a surviving spouse and no one ever told you any of this, it is very likely not too late. DIC can be applied for after the fact, and a service officer can look at your late husband's rating history and tell you whether one of these doors is open. The check does not expire just because a few years have passed. Let me be honest and clear with you before I close, the way I would want someone to be with my own family. I am not an attorney, and I do not work for the VA, and none of this is a ruling on your particular situation. These rules carry conditions and exceptions, and the details of one family are never quite the details of another. So let Marion and Ruth be your reason to go ask the real questions now, while the asking still changes something. The answer for your own home belongs to you and to a qualified person who can look at your service, your rating, and your marriage. What I hope stays with you is not the letter Marion opened. It is the quiet decision Earl made years before he ever needed it, the one that meant Ruth was never left staring at that same envelope. That decision is still available to most of the people hearing this. If it would matter to someone you love, this is the story to hand them, so they get to make that choice with the whole truth in front of them instead of finding out the way Marion did.